having a guy like Davis who played with a 5-star top of the class freshman like AJ Dybantsa last year, now coming to do the same thing at Missouri. I think that's another quality that they really needed, is guys who are comfortable playing in roles. I mean, I'm not sure exactly, and I don't know if you guys are, exactly what Kennard Davis's role is going to be with Missouri next year. But obviously, he seems like he's going to be a guy who's going to accept it, because that's kind of what you have to do when you play alongside stars, especially guys that are as ball usage reliant as Jason Crowe may be, which is certainly not a bad thing at all when saying that about Crowe. But the fact is, he's going to have the ball a lot. Welcome back to the All Things Mizzou podcast, presented by Missouri Tigers on SI, now a part of KCSN. If you didn't catch it last episode, I'm Killian Wright, as always, joined by Joey Van Zummeren and Michael Stamps. Today, we're going to be getting into a couple things with Mizzou basketball, kind of detailing some of the returners and what their roles may look like, also hitting on their new transfer that they picked up the other day, and then talk about Laird Veatch's extension. But before we get into all of that, just a quick couple newsy items. Incoming freshman linebacker JJ Bush was arrested Tuesday morning. He is also suspended indefinitely. He was caught speeding around 80 or 90 miles an hour in a 40 mile per hour zone. So we'll see how that plays out as the summer goes along. Other news, former Mizzou linebacker Khalil Jacobs has signed an undrafted free agent contract with the New England Patriots. Plenty of Tigers have landed there. You can go check out our coverage for some undrafted free agents and rookie minicamp invites on the website. And then also, Missouri picked up a commitment, 2027 3-star O lineman Luke Njaychuk, I think. There's a lot of talk about him with his name kind of sounding like Jayhawk a little bit, but I'm pretty sure it's Luke Njaychuk. So 3-star lineman there joining, and Mizzou continues to bulk up that in-state class. But getting back into the basketball talk, Kennard Davis committed the other day. BYU wing guard a little bit. I think he'll kind of play a tweener role there. Joey, thoughts on him?
Well, his first school was Southern Illinois Carbondale, and that's around my neck of the woods. And if you know anything about SIUC, it's that it's a really good school for engineering. And I think he picked up on some of that because Kennard is really good at engineering some open looks for himself. And as we talked about last episode, really Missouri needed to find another perimeter shooter. And he definitely adds that. Over the course of his career, has shot around 34% over his career to total. I think this past year with BYU, there was, playing with AJ Dybantsa, he kind of was in an interesting role, and obviously acclimating going from SIUC all the way up to BYU in the Big 12 and kind of acclimating there. And I think that will obviously be the question coming over to Missouri. I think the good thing for him here at Missouri, though, is just kind of the fact that obviously he's going to be asked to do things. He's obviously going to have a role on this team, but he's not going to be expected to be the big playmaker that he was at SIUC. And hopefully they're able to find that role a little bit better for him at Missouri than they were at BYU. Seemed like the role he was playing at BYU was kind of mixed throughout the season, and they were kind of trying to find out exactly which puzzle piece he fit into. But this really fits what we were talking about last episode. It's a guard with experience, a guard who can shoot. Really think it fits what Missouri was looking for really well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know every single remaining player that was left in the transfer portal. Maybe we were talking about this stuff last week, but I don't know if they could have really gotten much better than what they got in Kennard Davis. I think what stood out to me is, yes, the shooting that we were all talking about last week, that I was really preaching as well, having another guy who is a willing shooter. His numbers dipped a little bit at BYU. He was shooting 32%, but was shooting just south of 38 his sophomore year at Southern Illinois. So that's pretty impressive stuff there. Proved he can shoot it at the high level, at a high volume, but he also does match that kind of physicality, physical aspect on the offensive side of the ball that most of these transfers, I guess on both sides of the ball, but that most of these transfers, if not all of them, have kind of a check mark. Especially you think about Jamir Jones, he's kind of a thicker, heavier guard. Kennard Davis is 6'6", 215, which I I think that's pretty similar to Jamir. But I think Kennard definitely has some more guard-like qualities than Jamir. Probably a little more willing to put the ball on the floor, a little bit of a better ball handler. And then obviously there is the 3-point shooting aspect of this. He was shooting around 5 a game. Solid defender as well. I really, again, I think obviously this late in the game, the quality of portal player certainly dwindled a little bit. So this is a really high quality addition, given everyone that was around. And I don't know everyone that was available, but I think this really pretty much fits the bill for what they were looking for.
Yeah, agree there from both of those things. Joey, you kind of touched on it with one thing about Kennard being from around your neck of the woods. He played St. Louis. He played in the St. Louis area for high school, actually teamed up with Nick Randall for a little bit. They overlapped at Vashon, so that's cool seeing them get to reunite. You kind of got to see it last year with Javon Porter and Aaron Rowe, but Aaron Rowe didn't end up playing and Porter didn't play much. So maybe Davis and Randall will share the court a little more. Also, another thing you touched on with the AJ Dybantsa stuff, I think having a guy like Davis who played with a 5-star top of the class freshman like AJ Dybantsa last year, now coming to do the same thing at Missouri, I think that's another quality that they really needed, is guys who are comfortable playing in roles. I mean, I'm not sure exactly, and I don't know if you guys are, exactly what Kennard Davis's role is going to be with Missouri next year, but obviously he seems like he's going to be a guy who's going to accept it, because that's kind of what you have to do when you play alongside stars, especially guys that are as ball usage reliant as Jason Crowe may be, which is certainly not a bad thing at all when saying that about Crowe, but the fact is he's going to have the ball a lot. And so getting a guy like Davis who's comfortable playing with stars, I think that means a lot. And then also Davis, he seems like, to me, at least, a guy that I don't see him getting phased out of the rotation like maybe some other guards in the last few classes have been, or not even just guards, but players in general. Like last season, Sebastian Mack joining the team, there were definitely worlds where he was going to be an impact player, but I think we all kind of realized like there's also a chance that he doesn't play much in conference play. And that's what ended up happening. I don't really see this happening with Kennard Davis. So I think that's another thing, is now you can have Davis in your rotation as a guy like he will be able to play in February and March, in April, depending on how far they make it. But
so I want to add one more thing about Kennard Davis. And I think we were talking about, starting to dip in a little bit last week, rotation wise, about, how Bryson Tiller and Jalen Carey fit in and who's going to start where. And I think Kennard Davis might be the quality of player that can also throw a little bit of a wrench into that. Obviously, we don't know how things are going to go in the offseason and who else is going to join the team and things like that. But you're adding a proven scorer who, was almost average double digits game at a really good BYU team last year. So I think it's safe to say this is a starting caliber player. And again, we don't know who else is going to come into the lineup. We don't know how things are going to fit necessarily. And obviously there's, the starting lineup is a fluid thing, and different things are going to be better for different matchups. But I think this is the type of addition that could probably throw a wrench into what we were looking at the starting lineup wise. And maybe you start to put into question where if Jalen Carey is necessarily that starting level player, maybe he's a guy who comes off a bench. But at the bare minimum with Kennard Davis, you're going to get a guy similar to maybe what you're getting in Jalen Carey, who's going to be a really, really high quality bench player who's proved he could score the ball and can defend at a high level. So just want to throw in there that this might be the level of player that could throw a wrench in what we're viewing very, 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 very early into the preseason, if you want to call it, or still the offseason, I guess. But this could be the type of player that could certainly throw a wrench into that.
Yeah, and like you said, Davis also gives Gates kind of some lineup flexibility. You didn't see it too much last season. It was kind of Sean Phillips and Mark Mitchell were going to start at the 5 and the 4 every game. But the season before, when he went from starting Josh Gray and then also starting Mark Mitchell at the 5 and slotting Trent Pierce in that lineup, like you said, like having Kennard Davis now could be like, all right, we want to try Bryson Tiller at the 5. So let's put Kennard Davis at the 2, slide Jamir Jones up, slide whoever the power forward is up, and then slide Bryson Tiller up to the 5. So I think that gives Gates more to kind of tool with, whether it's as a starter or as Kennard just off the bench and who he wants to see play next to each other. but he didn't quite have that lineup flexibility last year. And he caught a lot of flack for lineups that he would deploy sometimes. And some of that is on him. And but some of it was also on roster construction that we talked a lot about after the season had ended. So that's some really interesting stuff. Joey, any final thoughts on Kennard Davis there?
Well, I mean, just kind of what you're hitting on right there, and I think we'll get to it with these returners that we're about to talk about for sure, is just that it felt like this past year, and we talked about it again at the end of the year with just how the roster was constructed, that a lot of these guys, it felt like they were playing maybe not out of position per se, but either being asked to take on bigger roles than their skill set really grants them the ability to, or not being able to really focus on what they're really good at. I think, like we talked about last week with Davis and Carey, both these guys that aren't the big headline grabbers that Bryson Tiller or Jamir Jones are, but they both not only add depth, but also really are going to allow, in my opinion, these guys like Trent Pierce, Nicholas Randall to really focus on what they're good at, because they don't have to worry about some of these other skill sets now that Carey and a guy like Davis kind of complete the puzzle a little bit more.
Agreed there. And with Davis's addition, now there are 13 players on the roster. So potentially 2 more spots to fill. Could also just go with 1. That's what they did last year. They rostered 14. So with that last spot, there's a couple different ways they could go. If they want another true 7-footer, you could add a center. If you want another pure sharpshooter alongside what you envision Trent Pierce and Aiden Chronister to be, they can go get that. If you want another true point guard behind Jason Crowe, you can go get that. There's a lot of options they can get. Michael, I don't need any specific sort of players, but is there any sort of archetype that you think would fit well with the team as the roster starts to kind of end?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear now that after adding Davis, they kind of got their, maybe one more shooter, another, I don't want to say primary scorer, but guy who can have the ball in his hands and score the ball. So I think it's pretty clear that they need a firm, more experienced backup point guard at this point. And again, we don't really know what the names look like. I'm blanking on his name, but there's the guy from Weber State who I touched on last week, who seems to be more of a truer point guard. And he's a little undersized, if I remember correctly, but he had a really good scoring season. So that might be a good option for a guy who can come in and give you 10 or so minutes a night. Maybe he gets phased out of the rotation once SEC play or crunch time and the season starts. But in my mind, I think that's really it. With the big guys, I don't think there's going to be much of a desire to add anyone else when you're going to have the flexibility like you just talked about with Tiller and then Carey, and then you still have Trent Burns. He's still a very important part of this team. And you'd imagine that's a guy that they are going to work really, really hard to play. I don't know how many minutes a game he played this last season, but it wasn't much. So you'd have to think they're going to work as hard as they can to get him more game ready and kind of starting to fit into both sides of the ball a little bit more. And I'm not going to sit here and say that Luke Northweather is going to play a whole bunch of minutes or Nicholas Randall. I don't really know where they fit in right now. I guess we'll talk about them later too. But you've got more than enough depth at the 4 and the 5. I don't think there's much of a need to add anyone else there. You can never have enough shooters. Again, I'm blanking on names. I know the Stetson guy. I think it was Ethan Copeland. That he was a high volume 3-point shooter this year and shot pretty well. So that's the only other guy off the top of my head that I can remember they reached out to. I know Christian Harmon from Arkansas State committed to, I want to say, Virginia, either on Tuesday or Monday. So that's another option kind of down the drain. So the options are obviously a little more on the slim side, but yeah, I think a true backup point guard is probably the main thing you're really looking for now, because I don't think I don't know if they're ready to have Aaron Rowe play that many minutes, and maybe they are. And I guess if they don't get a backup point guard, that says more than enough about that. But at the same time, like I said earlier, you can never have enough shooters. So if they want to go add another guy who can step in and hit a 3 game, that couldn't hurt either.
Yeah, that backup point guard is first spot my mind went to as well there. I mean, Aaron Rowe, having him go from complete redshirters true freshman season to having to come in behind Jason Crowe would be a big jump.
Agreed there. I was I've got something actually written and ready to send out here soon about some point guards they could target. And yeah, Michael, that Weber State guy is there. So I do think backup point guard is the primary need here. Aaron Rowe could be really good. We'll touch on that later, but literally haven't seen a second of him play college basketball. So it's a little worrisome, especially when Crowe is in the same boat as not having played a second of college basketball. Even if Rowe ends up being better than whatever backup they bring in, just to have a guy in the locker room who is experienced, maybe give some pointers to Crowe and Rowe, I think that would go a long way. And there's definitely still some experienced options left, especially with whatever ends up happening with the 5-and-5 rule. That could mean there's a ton of guys who played 4 years ready and available in the portal. So
I will add to that. It is for sure not going to be retroactive. So any guy who was set to be done is done.
Okay, confirmed then. Yeah. All right. Well, switching to kind of a broader perspective, Laird Veatch, the athletics director, signed a contract extension that will keep him at Missouri through, I believe, the 2032 season. Obviously, there's been some programs see a lot of success in the last couple of years. Gymnastics, basketball has now made the tournament 2 years in a row. Football is on the up and up as always. Some programs that have not seen the same success, baseball struggling a little bit, softball a little bit of a dip. Overall thoughts on that, Joey?
I would just say, it's hard to really know how much credit to give anybody. Like, it's easy for the Mizzou Athletics press release to, list, all the success football has had and basketball has had. And obviously Laird Veatch deserves credit for that. But it's hard to know what exactly that looks like, how much of that is coached. And I'm not trying to take credit away from Laird Veatch, but it's just hard on the outside to really evaluate. I will say, though, I think it's important to have stability. I know a lot of people, when Desiree Reed-Francois moved on from Missouri to Arizona, mentioned hey, it's been a long time since an athletic director didn't use Missouri as a launching pad for another spot, and we were able to really have stability. And you hear coaches talk about that all the time, especially Dennis Gates and Eli Drinkwitz, of having stability with the athletics administration, but then also alignment. And both those guys have talked highly of the alignment they have there. I'd also say to his credit and the athletic administration staff as a whole, you see programs around the country, even ones in the SEC, Arkansas, having to cut programs, specifically the tennis program. Laird Veatch said 2 weeks ago at the St. Louis Fans event that they are in a spot where they are not having to consider that at all. And so that's something directly with the athletic administration that you can point to as, a really good sign of health, I would say.
And Michael?
Yeah, I think the worst thing about Desiree Reed-Francois leaving was Jackson Francois transferring to Arizona. That was a heartbreaking loss. No, I agree with Joey. Evaluating the success of an athletic director is really challenging. I think a lot of that might kind of fall on the completion of the stadium project, and I guess the amount of money that comes out of that. Obviously, we're in a kind of a revenue-driven world now in college athletics, and you would think that would lead to that in terms of overall success for the athletic program and the football team, but we don't really have any way to measure that until the season starts. So I think that's kind of one thing that comes to my mind. And then at this point, we know with, how, NIL and revenue sharing works now, that not every team of yours is going to be good, and not every team is going to get the resources they need or deserve. It's just how it works. And it's a shame. And I know there are Mizzou fans out there who have such high expectations of baseball, for example. And I think, having a good football and men's basketball team at this point in time in college athletics comes at a cost. And that might mean that your baseball team is not good, or your softball team is not good, or you have a team that gets cut, like you mentioned. I think it certainly is a good sign that doesn't seem to be the case for any of Mizzou athletics at the moment. So that's a positive. But yeah, I think we know at this point that it's just not possible for everyone to be good. Not every team is going to get the resources they deserve. But at the same time, you've seen improvement in men's basketball with a couple NCAA tournament appearances. I think to say the football program is either it's on the up or it's been steady with its success in the SEC. I think that's a fair statement. Whether people expect more or not, I think it's pretty obvious that they do. But all things considered, where they stand in that area, I think that's a positive. And I think this is kind of a blanket statement, but it could always be worse, right? You could always be bad, and you could always not bring in good players. And when you think about Mizzou football and Mizzou men's basketball, that just hasn't been the case. They've been able to pull in good talent, both in the high school ranks and in the transfer portal. And they've been able to turn that talent into wins in some capacity. So again, it sounds kind of silly and stupid to say, but it always could be worse, and you always could be at the bottom of the SEC, and it just hasn't been the case. So I think, and at least since Laird Veatch has been here as well. So I guess in that sense, you can say it's been a success as well.
I mean, yeah, there certainly shouldn't be any gripes about Laird Veatch getting extended. I think he's done a perfectly fine job at worst. So with that, we'll wrap up the talk on Veatch. And we're going to throw it to break real quick. And once we get back, we will discuss some of the returners on Mizzou men's basketball and what they might look like and what they mean to the team for next season.
My name is Terrell Jolly. A lot of people call me TJ, founder and CEO of Integrity Capital Management. So Integrity Capital Management originally started out as a property management firm, but we slowly transitioned to what is described as an incremental development firm that's focused on situational housing. I know most people say affordable, but we believe in creating housing for people that are actually in need and built to the end user. I believe everyone needs a home, because when you have home, you have hope. The reality is that when you're building a business, one thing you don't think about is like what a true banking relationship means. And, I had the honor and privilege of meeting Debbie early on in my career when I was just trying to get going. And as a small business, it's really challenging at times because people don't understand the concept or not believe the longevity because you're just getting started. But Debbie was willing to take a chance on me, be patient with me. I almost look at it like a grassroots initiative. She's seen and believe what I'm about. Anybody that's really true about their business and want to get some things done, I would definitely trust hands down Emprise, because Deb's team, along with Aaron and Jackie and all the amazing people that work behind the scenes, even from the treasury side, I would say, hey, give them an opportunity, because you won't be disappointed, and you will actually be in hands that actually somebody care and that will see you from start to finish.
All right, getting into the returners. We'll start with what probably is the biggest one in Trent Pierce coming back. He's obviously averaged double-digit points last year in SEC play whenever he returned from injury around conference start. He's going to probably start again next year. It's hard to imagine him not. He's going to play a pretty pivotal role as a floor spacer and maybe a defender. We'll see if he can finally kind of put some of that together. But he's a really high potential guy that will mean a lot to the team next year. Michael, what do you kind of envision for Trent Pierce in his senior season at Mizzou?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously you can't really measure leadership, and it sounds like kind of a cliche, but he's going to be the most experienced returning guy on the team. So that certainly stands for something. I think in general, it was nice to see Trent kind of take the jump that people hoped he would take and kind of expected him to take, even after kind of a weird start to the season, after just not playing for a really long time. Still don't really know what all that was about. But he was really efficient and he kind of proved he could be a volume scorer. He had his best season from the field, best 3-point shooting season, best season from the free throw line. Really, all of his numbers saw an increase, and a big part of that was because he was playing more, but he showed some pretty clear developments in his game. He was able to put the ball on the floor a little bit more and be more than just kind of the sharpshooter that people thought he was going to be. And I think with the way this team is built right now, and I know we've talked about the shooting concerns, and I think some of those certainly still exist. And Trent Pierce is obviously the guy you're going to have to look toward as of right now to be the team's primary 3-point shooter, arguably like he was last year. And I think there's no reason that those numbers can't keep increasing, keep rising. Unless there's something significant that changes between now and whatever happens in the transfer portal and beginning of next season, he's going to be the team's, best shooter. And I think certainly room for him to keep growing, but his role really I don't know if it'll increase because he had a pretty big role this past season, but I think it will arguably be more important. I think this last year there were more pseudo shooters, you could say. I think this next year there's certainly not going to be much discussion that's going to be different. He's going to be the main guy, so he's going to have a very important role in this team next season. I think it's pretty impressive and crucial that they brought him back, and he should be slated for a big senior season.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, outside of his shooting, like you mentioned, it was so evident once we returned, just the value he had spacing the floor. I'd say I was surprised to see, I was looking back at his numbers. It felt like to me, in my perception, that he had like somewhat of a drop off in 3-point shooting in the last part of the season, but his numbers from the first 10 games of SEC play compared to the last 10, including both postseason tournaments, were about the same all across the board. I just think there was some games where he like just happened to be dazzling from the start. Like I know there was that one game where he had like 3 threes in the first like 5 minutes. And there were some moments there where we were looking at it like, wow, I mean, if he can consistently do this, then would be like a really efficient secondary scorer. And so, like you said, though, I mean, I think at this point, like you said, I think he's definitely made that jump that people were expecting. Maybe it's not what people had in mind exactly when he was coming into the program 3 years ago, maybe some more higher expectations than what he turned out to be. But at this point, you know what you're getting out of him, and it's overall good minutes with the shooting, with the spacing. And I do think it's overall good to have a player develop all 4 years and really be able to see that out.
I think with Pierce, there's a couple different variations Mizzou could get with him next year. There's a world where, and Pierce might be the second best on-ball scorer right now on the roster. Obviously, Jones, really athletic transition guy on the wing, and then Tiller, really athletic big guy. As far as like skill set goes, Pierce might have them both beat. Definitely, as far as shooting goes, he does. So I guess Pierce could kind of turn into a Robin for Crowe as like a maximum ceiling, I think, where he maybe raises that average to like 13 points per game. And like you kind of see him start to put the ball on the floor even a little bit more and get to that mid-range or get to the rim on his own a little more. And I think there's a world where that happens. But I also think with how Mizzou's roster currently sits, with Pierce really being the only solidified consistent shooter, obviously Davis has been a good shooter before, and at times he is, but not as consistent as Pierce was last season. And then Chronister, you just don't know what you're going to get. He's a freshman. So there's another world where Pierce turns into this like crazy high volume 3-point guy, and just really acts as every time I touch the ball, if I have an inch space, I'm gonna throw it up. And I don't think that's that bad. I think that could be really valuable, especially in a starting lineup where they do maybe go double big and like Tiller's at the 4 and Carey is at the 5, or Tony Bryant also starts, and you could really use that extra bit of spacing from Pierce. So I think there's a lot of different ways he can make an impact next year. If you guys have any thoughts on maybe which variation of Pierce you expect, whether it's a guy who's going to elevate into that, hey, like I'm the number 2 scorer on this team now, I'm a senior, like I'm ready for it. Or if you think Pierce might kind of stay where he is, maybe raise that 3-point volume a little bit, but stay more as like a complimentary guy.
I mean, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but I think we're all assuming that, and this is too far out there, but I think we're all assuming that Jason Crowe is like automatically the number 1 guy. And I don't want to say he's not, but he is a true freshman. And we have to, consider with Crowe that I don't know how many shots he was taking a game. It was something absurd. He was shooting a ton. The shot selection was kind of iffy. And I think that's obviously not going to be the same. And he's going to be taking a massive step up in competition. There's going to be a massive step up in physicality. I fully expect Crowe to be the number 1 guy, and I'd be surprised if he wasn't. But I think there's a universe where that takes a little time for him to get adjusted to that, right? So just pointing that out there. I'm not saying Trent Pierce is going to be the number 1 guy, but that's something to consider. But if there is even any sort of small uncertainty, that Jason Crowe might need some acclimation period. I think the number 2 spot is certainly wide open. And I think there's a variety of candidates who could go take that. And you would think have to pencil in Trent Pierce, or at least put him at the top of the list just because he's played for Dennis Gates for multiple years. He's more experienced than just about everyone else on the team. I think you're looking at Jamir Jones as a guy who could do that too, but I think you certainly could get a version of Trent Pierce where he's kind of the Robin to Jason Crowe, still shooting at a high volume, at a high level. Again, he's proven that he could shoot the 3 at a high level. 38% is no joke on 5 attempts a game. I think that could arguably continue to go up. He, like I said earlier, he showed he could put the ball on the floor a little bit and attack the rim. If he could kind of continue to add to that multi-layer, multi-level aspect of his scoring, continue to try to get fouled, maybe add some, around the rim or mid-range stuff while continuing to shoot, there's no reason he can't be that number 2 guy. So I think when you look at the roster right now, it feels like he's the most viable option, unless I'm completely disregarding someone. It feels like he should, I don't want to say be penciled in, but he should have a good chance to do so.
If I had to put money on who Dennis Gates is most likely to say he wants to make 100 threes and attempt like 300, it's Trent Pierce for sure. I think Dennis Gates is going to want him to do what you said, Killian, of every time he has the ball, take a shot.
Yeah, I think that's probably the ideal version of Pierce. And then maybe if there's times where the non-Crow lineups, or obviously never hope this happens, but if Crow has to miss some time and Pierce maybe then steps up as, all right, I can take 15 shots this game. We'll see what ends up happening, but I think either way, he's bound to be pretty effective next season. One guy who we're not as sure of as being effective next season is Trent Burns. There were flashes this year when Trent Burns looked like the best center on the team. He had that little 4-game stretch in the middle of SEC play where he all of a sudden looked like he finally put it all together, was blocking shots, was getting mobile in the paint, was hitting like 15-foot hook shots against Mississippi State, I believe, which I don't think that's ever going to be a mainstay, but he was doing it there for a second. So, but he also obviously had times where he seemed to be unplayable, and the drop off between him and Sean Phillips was just ginormous. So with Burns next year, they've now loaded up on bigs between Carey and Tiller, and then obviously Brian incoming. It seems like he might not have as big of a role as maybe some people thought he would heading into the portal cycle, but I think he will still probably be a rotational guy next year, even if Carey, Bryant, and Tiller are all playing. I'm not sure how many minutes it'll be, but I would be shocked if all of a sudden he's back out of the rotation. Michael, what do you kind of envision for Trent Burns heading into the season?
I was really pleasantly surprised that Trent Burns was even playable at all this year. I thought he was going to, not saying Luke Northweather or something in that category was a better player, but he had the experience, kind of feel for the game, and Trent Burns pretty clearly didn't have that at all to start the season, but he slowly worked his way to a spot where he could come on the court and not be a complete liability. But again, he's in such a unique spot with his size and the injuries. It takes a while to get adapted. I think adding Bryson Tiller and Jalen Carey is perfect for Trent Burns in a way, because he can maybe continue at the same rate he's at right now, where he can, play in maybe every single game, but he's not playing more than 10, 15 minutes. Maybe that would be more than this last season a night, and try to continue to get his feet under him, develop a feel for the game, and keep developing some of those skills. I think, Bryson Tiller's 6'11". I know Jalen Carey is 6'8", maybe. So it's not necessarily the tallest team. I know Bryson Tiller can protect the rim a little bit, but that's not exactly a primary skill set of Jalen Carey. So I think there's going to be some shot blocking value in putting Trent Burns into the lineup. I don't think Luke Northweather is going to be doing that all that much either. So there's certainly going to be some value in Trent Burns on the defensive side of the ball. I think it's really for him just continuing to get down the physicality of the game and just the feel, the footwork and things like that. He showed a pretty clear and obvious jump in a positive way in that regard this past season, but I think it's also pretty still clear that there's a long way to go. So I would be shocked if he doesn't play at all. I think Dennis Gates is probably going to want that rim protection in some capacity off the bench. And I think and this, maybe I'm wrong here, he pleasantly surprised me. I think he probably did the same thing for a lot of people, and maybe he can do that again. So I would be pretty surprised if he's not playing at all.
Yeah, he's basically entering his second year. In his first year, he was wasn't even like Aaron Rowe where he just wasn't playing. I mean, Trent Burns wasn't even able to practice his first year. And so, like you said, Michael, I was surprised and impressed really of, him returning. I believe he was cleared because he had that big game in non-con sometime in November. That was his first game, and he played like some good 10 minutes. And so I was surprised then in FCC play, especially once he got over the hump that was that Alabama game, how he was able to have string together some impressive performances. And really with all of these year one or year two guys that we're going to talk about today, there's really a moment I can pick out with all of them where they really flashed like what they could be. But then there's also a moment for all of them or multiple moments throughout the season where I can point to like it was a really bad half of basketball from them where they stuck out like a sore thumb and all their vulnerabilities and flaws and areas to grow were exposed. And that's definitely the case for Trent Burns. His game against Mississippi State is going to be like one of those, if the game like mattered more, it'd be even more of this case, but it's going to be like one of those like 5 years from now with your friends, I feel like, where you're like, do you remember the game where Trent Burns was like just going absolutely crazy on the hook shots against Mississippi State? And so, like you said, I don't know if that's going to be a consistent part of his game to expect, but that was certainly exciting to get a moment where he flashed that. And another thing with all of these year one or year two guys is like there's definitely some trait you can pick out that it's like they just need to build on that. And for Trent, it's obviously the height, especially as a help defender, just to throw another obstacle in there. But I agree with you. I mean, until he can really get the footwork down and just move a little more with a little more agility, he's going to have some bad moments. But I agree with you. I think they really like the potential on him. And again, I'd be surprised, like you said, if he's not playing around 10, 15 minutes a night.
It would really be a disservice to Trent Burns to not play him, because I think the what if of Trent Burns is, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but it's at the top of the list of guys on this roster if you could really crack and get into that potential. But it's probably going to take more work than anyone else on the team just because of some of those physical limitations. So I think there's got to be a fine line of development and resting him and keeping him healthy too is really important. But you almost have to play him. So I'd live with some of the bad moments for that development, because I think there's a really big what if around him that could turn into something really good if, again, he has kind of the proper development.
Yeah, and with Burns, obviously, Joe, you touched on that agility. Like, he's a 7'5" guy with foot issues. That agility is going to be, it's going to take a while to get there, I think. And it's going to be more of him knowing where to be a lot. He's going to have to, I know he's got the length advantage on everyone in terms of like the wingspan and then just the height, but that agility, he's always going to be at a disadvantage there, most likely. And so he's going to have to get to know what spots he's got to be at before other people do. And so that is also something he'll grow in. And that's something that most freshmen or second year players, whatever you want to call them, just aren't going to know in the first place. So that's something that's pretty easy to envision Burns getting better at, even if you don't envision him taking a big leap in the agility department. Also, just his finishing around the rim, I think for a 7'5" guy, that was pretty limited last year, aside from like those, the hook shots, whatever you want to call those, that was going on. But I think if he can refine his game, like Michael, you said, he's not ruled out as like a future starter in a high conference or anything like that. But as far as what next year goes, he's probably a backup, but it's more so about just like putting together the tools for next season. Joe, you also touched on bad halves of basketball about some of these younger guys who had some really, really bright moments and some really low moments. I do remember Nicholas Randall, I think, getting 5 fouls in just a handful of minutes against Prairie View A&M. And that was like a whoa. I didn't even realize, like, how did he just do that? Like, it was like seeing in the moment, it was like, oh, there's 3, there's 4. Oh, so you're looking at, oh, he did. Okay. But he's kind of labeled himself as this enforcer guy, which is obviously, I think every team kind of needs. So he's got an emotional or a locker room role, I guess, already. But for what his role in terms of the rotation could look like next year, I think it's pretty murky. I don't really see where he fits in the rotation, to be quite honest right now, especially in conference play. We already talked about Bryant, Carey, and Tiller being guys who are certainly going to play. And then you throw in Burns there, who we all think is probably going to play as well. And then it gets down to like Northweather and Randall. And I mean, both of those guys might not play. I find it hard to believe they both play regular minutes, and even one of them might be a stretch to get on the court. But for Nick Randall, I'm not sure what exactly he needs to do to carve out a rotational role next year, if it's possible. But Michael, what do you see for Nick Randall?
Yeah, I think I don't really have much to add to what you said, honestly. I don't entirely know where he fits, after adding Jalen Carey and Tiller and Tony Bryant. I don't know if there's a clear path to him getting minutes. He didn't really play enough to show that he could excel at one specific thing. He certainly has some physical advantages. He's physical. I think he's kind of a crafty and creative guy, and he has some defensive bonuses as well. But I just don't know if he's at this very moment, from what we saw last year, going to excel enough at anything to really earn minutes over an experienced guy like Jalen Carey and the raw potential of Tony Bryant. So I think saying his role in the depth chart in the roster next year is murky. I think that's a pretty fair assessment. I don't exactly know where he fits. And I think I never want to say it's unfair to any of these guys to say that they're not going to play or they don't have a role, because there's crazy summers of development all the time and crazy off seasons. And he could certainly be a beneficiary of one of those. But I don't entirely see it right now. I don't want to rule it out completely, but he's got a lot of experience and talent ahead of him. So he's definitely going to have to prove himself early on if he wants to change that.
Right. I mean, like last year, it felt like the main thing where he was able to see the court pretty early was just the fact that he is already a pretty physical defender, 6'9", 240. And it seemed like they were kind of trying to figure out his offensive role throughout the season. And so it's a lot more crowded defensively, where that's not going to be as a easy ticket to playing time for him for, a big.
Yeah, I think one thing that he does benefit off of from this year is bringing a guy like Jalen Carey in. Although Carey might just steal Randall's role this season as to like what Randall could have been, I think that's also a guy that Randall could definitely take some pointers from. Carey's solidified himself now as 2 full seasons in the SEC as a regular rotational guy who played almost every game for both Vanderbilt and Tennessee, hovering around that high teens, low 20s mark in minutes per game. I think Randall could certainly learn a lot from him on how to play as an undersized big, whether that's rebounding, whether that's finishing. I mean, Carey averaged he averaged 7.4 points per game last year. So if he's consistently scoring with this kind of funky build in the paint, maybe Randall can take some pointers from that. But yeah, that's probably more of a future thing than a right now thing. That's not exactly the case for Randall's freshman teammate last year, Aaron Rowe. Rowe obviously redshirted last season, and now, as the roster currently sits, is the backup point guard. So the pathway to him playing is a lot more clear. But obviously, we all agreed earlier that Mizzou should probably go get a backup point guard with more experience than Rowe. That might not happen. No guarantees. So overall, Michael, once again, expectations for Aaron Rowe next season. Is he going to play a lot? What do you think is in store for him?
Yeah, I feel like I can't really put a firm grasp on that either until we know if they're adding another point guard or not. I think if they do, it's pretty clear that he's not. He might be end of the bench guy through non-con and then phased out of the conference rotation. I think, I mean, nothing against Aaron Rowe. I think he has some pretty clear, pretty clear talent. I am really curious to see where he weighs in starting his redshirt freshman season. I don't remember what the number was, but I know he was pretty small. Yeah, ESPN says he's 155 pounds. So that's not ideal SEC college basketball point guard weight whatsoever. I think we all know that. So that's got to change, obviously. And I think part of his game is kind of his shiftiness and his quickness and kind of an energy and hustle guy. So you have to find the balance there a little bit so he doesn't lose that completely. But yeah, you just, it's hard to put a firm grasp on it until we know if they're adding another point guard. If they don't, and he is the backup, I don't want to say I'm concerned. It's just, that's a pretty gigantic question mark and a lot of faith to be putting in a player. And we've talked about it. We talked about it last week about having ball handlers, and there isn't a clear secondary ball handler on the team right now at all, really. Obviously, Jason Crowe is the main one, and that's kind of the downside of having Jamir Jones in the role that they're anticipating him playing. He's not exactly that, and you would be asking a lot of someone to be kind of that secondary distributor if there's no backup point guard. So, long story short, they need to do that. But I think assuming that happens, Aaron Rowe's role is obviously going to be diminished, which is fine. He's still got a long ways to go in his development, both physically, maturity-wise, and playing level-wise. But I think there's clear talent there. Maybe he could come in and hit a couple shots. He's a pretty good scorer in his high school days. So I don't think we should be expecting a lot of Aaron Rowe next year.
Yeah, the two notes I had for him, I feel like you at least want to see two things. One, like you said, Michael, really like just putting on size. I remember seeing him in practice and warm-ups last year, and it was apparent that 155 at least is not too far off for a 6'2" guy. And then two, I mean, at the very least, I think you want to see good minutes out of him in non-conference play and at least allow him to, get his feet wet a little bit there. And I think that would be exciting, at least to see against some of the non-con guys. Although Dennis Gates did say that they might be looking to strengthen the non-con schedule with the NCAA tournament expansion. So I myself, and I'm sure a lot of the fan base would appreciate if the non-conference schedule is strengthened. But, if there's 4 or 5 mid-major teams that Aaron Rowe can go and show off kind of that slipperiness, that would be fun, I think.
Yeah, I think Rowe redshirting last year, Gates didn't do that with Ant or T.O. So I think Rowe redshirting last year, especially when the guard rotation was as kind of thin as it was. Obviously, you had the injuries to Boateng both ahead of the season, and then again the one that ended his season. And then Sebastian Mack didn't exactly pan out as you had hoped. But the guard rotation being as thin as it was last year, and Gates still saying, yeah, we're going to redshirt Aaron Rowe, I think that kind of signifies to me that that's a pretty long-term plan. And it doesn't exactly strike me as we're going to redshirt you in your freshman year, and then in your redshirt freshman season, we're going to have you as a 15-minute per game guy. It strikes me more along the lines of, Joey, what you were saying is, yeah, when we play these mid-major teams, when these SWAC teams come to town, or when we go to Howard and the first game of the season or whatever, yeah, you can play 15 minutes there. Other games, if they're up 20 or down 20 with a few minutes left, all right, Aaron Rowe, get in. Let's see what you can do. Like you did this against mid-major. Let's see what you can do against SEC. I think that's probably the outcome for him next year, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I'd be pretty surprised if they did kind of launch him into this backup point guard role, especially with, last season, the end to the season was just like, wow, there's not enough guys who can do something with the ball on the floor. And I don't think they want that to happen again. So I'd imagine they go out and get someone, which would mean Aaron Rowe is in that kind of developmental role still. Moving on from Aaron Rowe, we'll go to Arnar Boateng, who ahead of the season looked really strong. Obviously, he had that exhibition match against K-State where I think he had 15 or 16 points, looked really athletic. I think was even kind of hitting a floater. I believe he made 2 or 3 threes as well. So that was a Boateng that we certainly didn't see in the 24-25 season, but we also didn't really see it in the 25-26 season. So we saw the little flash of it against K-State, and then obviously Gates had some really high praise for him. I believe referring to him as a top 3 player on the team at one point, or implying that he was heading into the season. So I think Boat is a guy that everyone knows just kind of has this like loaded potential, but he's not exactly close to putting it together either. In a season where Mizzou seems like they're going to try and be pretty competitive, what do you see for Boateng next year, Michael?
Yeah, it feels like off the bench in a still pretty restricted role. There should be a role for him, assuming he's healthy. I know the offense hasn't really come around yet. The jumper hasn't been existent really whatsoever, but he still is this very physical, very athletic 2 or 3 who can go out and play consistent defense, and maybe he'll get you a bucket off the dribble. Again, we know his athleticism. We know how physical of a player he is. If he can obviously we don't know where he is in terms of his injury recovery. I think that obviously needs to be the top priority. You would imagine he's ready to go in some capacity for the beginning of next season, though. But next step, try to find some way, find some ground to make up on offense, whether it's the jumper or, more consistent with the ball handling or things like that. The 3-point shot has just been bad. He is 6 for 30 in his 2 years at Missouri. So that's less than ideal. You would think that would be, again, a point of emphasis. But, when you look at who's available on the wing right now, I think there's certainly, just with the experience he has, he's certainly a more mature player, and the physical attributes as well. You'd think there's a role for him somewhere next year, probably pretty limited, but there should be one for him.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting with the injury timeline. He suffered the injury on February 4th. And we never got the full details on what exactly that was, but I kind of connect the dots a little bit when it's a non-contact leg injury. So we'll see where he's at with that. And also we don't know the details of if that's connected at all. Not connected, but if it's going to strain any recovery progress that he made from the leg injury that he had the offseason prior to the 25-26 season. But this is another guy that stands out to me of what I was talking about earlier. Of there's been times where the traits have really flashed, and obviously we know the athleticism that he brings and the potential that comes with it. But then, definitely some moments where he stuck out like a sore thumb. The first half of the Illinois game being really a major one of those. So like you said, though, Killian, Dennis Gates said that heading into the season, he thought Hunter Boateng was one of the 3 best players, had a really good showing in that Kansas State exhibition. So it's kind of at the same point we were at Hunter Boateng as we were at this point last year of like the potential is there. It's not all put together yet, and injuries are getting in the way.
Yeah, I think he's a really hard one to predict, especially as we wait on what the guard rotation will really look like going into next season. But yeah, you guys both nailed it. Potential's there, injuries, athleticism, non-shooting. We'll see how it all kind of jumbles together. This last guy, I think, is going to be a pretty quick discussion. I think we all know exactly what he's going to be. It's Luke Northweather. I think he is probably going to be the exact same player he was last season, because that is what he's been for all 3 seasons of his career. If you guys think anything different is going to happen with Luke Northweather, feel free to explain why.
I think Dennis Gates had hope for Luke Northweather in the first whatever amount of games of the season, and it became pretty evident, pretty quickly that just wasn't going to work. And he also kind of found something in Trent Burns, so he didn't have to throw out Luke Northweather in SEC play, which might have been a good thing.
Yeah, exactly. What the both of you said, I think he's going to be a pretty similar role. And now they have a little bit more depth for that to be an okay place.
Yeah, he'll hit a few threes in non-con and maybe one or two in SEC play, but probably not going to be playing in many serious situations. And that wraps it up for our returners and overall this episode. Any closing thoughts from either of you guys on the returners, on Kennard Davis, on Veatch, and anything else?
Go ahead, Joey.
I was just going to say overall with this group of returners, we talked entering the transfer portal of just the job that this coaching staff has done at retention overall. And I still think this year is a pretty good showing for that. Especially the Trent Pierce, the main one sticking out to me. Obviously losing Barrett and Robinson, especially T.O. Barrett, would have been good overall. But I think keeping this group, you get a returning starter in Trent Pierce and return guys with potential, even if they're not completely there yet. But to have Honor Boateng, Nick Randall, and Trent Burns, all guys that you're still pretty optimistic about, that's a good returning group.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, again, losing Robinson and losing Barrett sucks. And, I think there was obviously a moment of time where we thought there was a chance that T.O. Barrett was going to come back. And I think he probably could have played a pretty interesting role, excuse me, on this team if that was the case. And I think if T.O. Barrett is back, obviously he's, in a backup point guard situation, or maybe he's the 1B. I don't really know what that looks like. It would certainly be a little more clunky, but the depth on this team would look really, really solid. It also makes sense why he didn't come back, because obviously Jason Crowe is this team's point guard, so that was never really going to change. But yeah, I think player retention wise, it's kind of an interesting dilemma of whether do you let some of the guys at the bottom of the depth chart walk and just replace them with portal guys or late bloomer recruits or international guys, or do you bring them back? You have guys who what you're getting. They're going to have familiarity with the system and the coaching staff, and you're probably going to have a good feel for their development as well, especially with guys, like Burns and like Nick Randall and even like Honor Boateng, where there certainly still is room, and Aaron Rowe, I guess, there certainly is still plenty of room there for development and growth. They're still on the younger end, and they came in as high potential players. So in my mind, I think you would rather have the continuity than having to replace the whole back end of your roster, even if those spots might not be the most important when it comes to the important parts of the season when you're trying to contend for an NCAA tournament spot. Regardless, I think it's better to have those guys back. They have familiarity. You know where they are in their development. You're not getting anything new. You're going to know the personalities as well. You're going to know they're coachable, because you probably wouldn't bring them back if they weren't. So there's a lot more positives, even if it's, again, talent-wise, you probably know what you're getting there. You don't have to really bargain or bank on the fact that you might, get a player who's more talented, less talented in the transfer portal. So it's impressive that they did that. I think bringing Trent Pierce back is obviously really impressive. And then Kennard Davis, I don't want to say he's the best transfer addition so far. I think that would be a pretty wild statement to make. But I think right now, in this very moment, I don't think they could have done much better than him.
Yep, I think Pierce was probably the most important of the bunch to bring back just because of his spacing and then his leadership. And then the rest of the guys are high potential guys who might not make an immediate impact next season, but guys like Boateng and Randall and Rowe are certainly worth keeping around for the future just to see what happens. And same with Burns, obviously, although he might be a bit of both where he plays next season and is high impact in the future as well. And then even like Northweather, who's probably not going to play a role in conference play. This is a guy who's going to be entering the year having played 3 seasons of SEC basketball. It's just him and Trent Pierce on the roster who have done that. So at the very least, he's experienced and has played games. So not bad to have around. But yeah, that is going to do it for this episode of the All Things Mizzou podcast. You can check out all our basketball, football coverage on Missouri Tigers on SI, the website, and you can keep watching the All Things Mizzou podcast on this channel here. Thank you for listening.